On the 11th of May 2021, a serious fight broke out between Caroline Crouch and her husband, Babis, after a heated argument erupted. Her husband, who was cheating on her, was very manipulative, and he over-controlled her life. Caroline, who had already booked an hotel, was about to take her child with her, something which her husband was against. Her husband became very angry. He strangled her and pressed a pillow on her face, using his complete body weight, and killed her. The husband then staged a robbery attack on their house so that he can escape with the murder. Did Caroline deserve to die at the hands of her husband? Join us as we unravel events leading to the murder of Caroline Louise Crouch. Caroline Louise Crouch was born on 12th of July 2001 in the United Kingdom. She was the daughter of David Crouch, who was a retired engineer, and Susan della Cuesta. Caroline moved with her family to the island of Alonnisos in Greece when she was 8 years old. She was a very beautiful young woman. At a very young age, Caroline embraced her beachside life. She was passionate about both diving and swimming. She loved sports, and she was an excellent kickboxer fighter. She had attained her black belt and had won several competitions as a teenager. In the year 2017 in Alonnisos, when Caroline was 15 years old, she met a 27-year-old man, Babi Anagnostopoulos, who was a commercial helicopter pilot and was on a holiday. His mother, who lived in that highland, was a teacher at Caroline's school, so Babi flew his helicopter at Caroline's school in order to impress her. Babi was 12 years older than Caroline. In September 2018, they began dating, and after a year and a half into the relationship, Babi Anagnostopoulos proposed to Caroline, who was still an underage lady. She had not turned 18 years yet. The couple got married in Portugal on the 15th of July 2019. Their marriage was attended by family members and close friends. After the wedding, the couple returned to Greece, where they had purchased a house in Glykanera, a suburb in the northeast of Athens. They decided to buy a plot of land, and they had plans to build a family dream house in that land. To facilitate purchasing the land, Caroline had gotten 50,000 euros as a gift from her parents. As for the construction cost, the couples had around 10,000 euros hidden away in their house. Caroline was a university student in Athens, and her husband, Babis, worked as a pilot. He was the only one who placed food on the table, since Caroline didn't have enough money. Later, Caroline became pregnant, but she got a miscarriage a few months into the pregnancy. The loss had a traumatic impact on her, and she began to exhibit signs of psychological disorder. She was depressed, and she became much more rude and aggressive towards her husband. However, later on, Caroline became pregnant again, and on the 3rd of June 2020, they welcomed their first child, a daughter whom they named Lydia. Their marriage life was good, but later on they started developing a lot of problems in their marriage. They started engaging in a lot of arguments, even in trivial issues. This resulted into physical fight between these couple. They tried to mend their marriage by attending a couple's therapy sessions, but things seemed not to improve. Babi became more manipulative and controlling towards Caroline. He controlled every aspect of Caroline's life. And it reached a time when Caroline's mother would send to Caroline some money, but Babi would take it away. In spite of all of this, Caroline loved Babi so much, and she couldn't leave him even though their marriage hurt her so much. She didn't want her daughter to grow up without her two parents, so she decided to hold on their marriage. At one time, Caroline confided in her friend that Babi was cheating on her with his two female workers. One day, she seriously fought with her husband, and from that day, she became unsure if she could continue living with him. She planned on leaving Babi to go and stay with her sister. So, she told him that she wanted to leave because she felt awful. On the 11th May 2021, they had a serious fight when she said that she was leaving him, and she was taking their daughter along with her. She had booked a hotel for herself and her daughter that night. Babi became very angry. He strangled her, pressed a pillow on her face using his complete body weight, and killed her. He thought about getting rid of the body but knew that it will not be possible. He then thought of framing someone. It was then that an idea of a staged home invasion came into his mind. Babi killed their dog Roxy to make the scene look more realistic. He placed his own child next to the corpse of his wife. He then tied himself up with some ropes and dark tape. At around 6:15 a.m., Babi called the police to report that there had been a robbery at his home and that he needed an urgent help. He stated that his wife had been murdered and that he had been tied up by the attackers. His mouth during the entire call was filled with muffled words. The police arrived at the home of Babi and Caroline. Upon entering the house, they found the corpse of a dog, which was strangled to death with her own leash. The police went to the bedroom, where they found Babi on the floor. His eyes and mouth were covered with dark tape that reached his neck. He had a refrain that kept his hands and feet behind his back. The police found Caroline crouched, lying face down. They observed her pale skin and determined that she was murdered. Their infant daughter, Lydia, was beside her corpse crying. The child was, however, unarmed. The police found Babi, whose hands were tied behind his back and his mouth was covered with a dark tape, and they freed him. After being freed, Babi pretended to be in great shock upon seeing the corpse of his wife in the bed. The police immediately began to interrogate him concerning what happened. Babi gave the police his staged account of the event. He narrated that 4 intruders concealing their identities with hoods and armed with pistols broke into their house through the window at around 4:30 a.m. 3 of the men were inside, as the other man kept watch. The intruders killed the family dog, Roxy. They then entered into the bedroom and dragged Babi out of the bed, and they tied him up. They tied Caroline on the bed and started asking where the money was in the house. Babi showed them the Monopoly game box, which had 10,000 euros hidden in it. The burglars took the money, but they were not satisfied with the amount they had collected inside the box, and so they became increasingly agitated. They pointed a gun at the temple of their 11-month-old daughter. It was at that point that Caroline resisted and started screaming. This entire incident woke up their daughter, who was sleeping nearby. One of the men grabbed her by her throat and told her to stop. He continued suffocating Caroline. Seconds later, she slammed down dead on the bed. The burglars roamed from one room to another, ransacking the house, stealing cash and jewelry worth thousands of euros. Even though Babi was blindfolded, he tried to free himself. However, the tapes around his neck were tightened to the extent that he kept fainting in and out of consciousness. He eventually fainted and then regained his sense after a while. Once conscious, he heard the burglars' footsteps as they fled away from the scene, leaving him tied up. The intruders fled away with 10,000 euros in cash and jewelry worth 20,000. However, in the process of fleeing away, one of the intruders left his hood behind, and Babi was able to get a glimpse of his face. During that moment, the only thing Babi could hear was the painful cry of his infant daughter. He struggled to free himself from the dark tape binding his hands and feet. After a significant struggle, he managed to partially free his hands and remove the tapes from his mouth, allowing him to call for help at around 6 a.m. o'clock. Babi dialed emergency services using his nose to press the buttons on his mobile phone. It was at that point that the police arrived. After the police had interrogated Babi and heard what happened, they began investigating the scene of crime. They found the window was broken and everything was disorganized. They saw how the living room and kitchen had been completely destroyed. The drawers were opened and empty, with clothing and other belongings scattered across the entire space. They found an opened Monopoly game box, which the couple stored their money. They also found a security camera on the living room couch, but upon examining it, they noticed its memory card was missing. Babi told them that the intruders went away with its memory card. The police, however, didn't find any DNA or fingerprints belonging to the intruders in that house. They found the hood of one of the intruders. The police told Babi to sketch one of the intruders he may have had a glimpse on. He sketched an overweight, dark-skinned, tall individual. As the investigations continued, the investigators questioned Babi and Caroline's inner circles. They examined CCTV footages at homes and businesses in close proximity. In the footage, the police identified a dark-colored vehicle, followed by a motorcycle that was cruising around the couple's house on the morning of the murder. However, there was no evidence of suspicious activity or individuals entering or leaving the area around the time the break-in occurred. The news of Caroline's death spread all over the country and internationally. Journalists interviewed Babi concerning the brutal killing of his wife. Babi told them that he wishes that what was happening to him would never happen to anyone else. He backed police efforts and continued to front the media, all to keep Caroline's case alive. Babi was active on social media, answering questions and expressing gratitude for continued support. He continued to share heartfelt posts in social media, expressing his sorrow and loss. Caroline Crouch was laid to rest 3 days after the murder. Her burial site was the Greek island of Alonnisos. Many people attended her burial ceremony. Among those who was in attendance was Babi, who killed her. Babi praised his late wife for being the joy of their lives, and he added that she will always be near him through their daughter, Lydia. A car was pulled over in northeast Greek as a routine stop. Inside was a 36-year-old Georgian national male, Georgi Herodos Vili, on the route to the Bulgarian border. He was attempting to flee the country. The police requested to see his passport. Upon examining it, they identified the passport as fake. The man had a remarkably similarity with the sketch that Babi had drawn to describe one of the intruders allegedly involved in Caroline's death. Georgi was arrested and interrogated for 4 days, during which physical means of getting the answers from him were used. This included beatings. The investigators found out that he was a violent criminal who had multiple prior convictions. He was wanted for 12 break-in, which were committed in Athens in the past 6 months. 3 of the break-ins were committed around Caroline and Babi's neighborhood. In one of the break-ins, which took place in December, Georgi and 3 of his fellows broke into a house through a rear window, and they dragged the female occupant of the house by her hair and threatened to slit her throat if she didn't cooperate. They robbed the woman 10,000 euros and jewelry before escaping. On the 7th of March, Georgi and his group again broke into another house where they tied 4 of their preys. That included an older couple along with their cleaning lady. They robbed the occupants of the house, a lot of money, and other valuable items. With these criminal records and a resemblance to the sketch, the police were sure they had caught Caroline's killer. He was repeatedly questioned about getting to the location, entering the house, and killing Caroline. The physical means used to get information left him concussed. However, he kept his stance and stated that he had never heard of Caroline Crouch. The evidence police had against him were not of any value, and they couldn't prove his involvement in Caroline's murder, so they cleared him of any involvement in Caroline's death. As a result of his torture and accusations, 3 police officers were demoted from the Athens homicide squad. The police continued with their investigations, and they set their sights on a local Albanian organized crime group. They got a list of 100 suspects, which they later narrowed to 10. These 10 suspects were hardcore criminals who were known as the Red List. The investigators took mugshots of these suspects and showed them to Caroline's husband, Babi, for identification. However, none of the suspects could be identified to have been involved in Caroline's murder. The investigators tightened their investigations further. They went to the extent of placing a reward money of 300,000 euros for anyone with a substantial information about Caroline's killer. However, the information were so scarce that the reward money went unclaimed. The investigators decided to re-look at Babi's story. They interrogated his neighbors and asked them if they knew if Caroline and Babi's house had been trashed, as Babi had initially claimed. The neighbors told the police that they didn't hear anything of the sort. The police got curious and asked themselves why intruders would tie the man of the house only to fight and kill the woman. The investigators looked at the data of Babi's security camera. They found out that the memory card was removed at 1:20 a.m., a few hours before the intruders supposedly broke into their house. The investigators decided to look at the smartwatch Caroline was wearing at the time of her death. The smartwatch monitored her pulse, which was reading at 3:58 a.m., indicated that she was asleep, but the pulse reading at 4:05 a.m. indicated that Caroline was in severe physical and mental distress. Her pulse reading at 4:11 indicated that her heart had stopped beating. This was before the time Babi claimed the murder took place. The investigators also looked into Babi's smartphone. They found out that it had a fitness app. Upon examining the app, its data revealed that Babi was moving around the house during the time he was supposed to be tied up. The police examined his phone records. They discovered that Babi had been active on his phone during the time he claimed that he had been tied up, and he was unable to move. This further undermined his version of the events. The police had also tried to reenact Babi dialing emergency services with his nose. However, no one was able to do that. The investigators examined Babi's basement window, and they found it to be very small, and they described it as not the point of entry the intruders used to break into the house, as Babi initially told them. These discrepancies led the investigators to question the credibility of his story. On the 17th of June, a memorial service was being held for Caroline at Alonnisos by her family. Babi, who was in attendance, was with his daughter. Photographs of Lydia sitting on his laps, then hanging her late mother, were wildly circulated. Those who had gone to mourn noticed the presence of the detectives at the ceremony. The investigators waited until the event was concluded, then they began to approach Babi discreetly. They told him that they had a new information on the case and urged him to go with them and identify a suspect who was detained, and he agreed. He was transferred to Skiathos from where he left for Athens on a plane. Upon arrival at the station, investigators told Babi that he was the new suspect in the murder case. He was shown overwhelming and irrefutable evidences that revealed inconsistencies with the details he had initially shared. He was interrogated for 8 hours before he broke down. Eventually, he began to confess murdering Caroline, but his confession was one filled with fabrications. He told the police that he and Caroline started arguing on the 10th May, the night before her death. They only fought over their daughter, and that Caroline was determined to take her and leave. This made Babi to lose his control, given that the child was his life. He also added that Caroline had thrown their infant child in the cart and told him to leave the house. Caroline resorted to physical abuse and had pushed him and punched him. Babi added that because of this, his judgment became clouded. He then strangled her and suffocated her to death using a pillow. After killing his wife, he became desperate and knew that he couldn't tell the truth, so he decided to make it look like a burglary. He tied himself up, killed their dog, and staged the scene to make it look like intruders had broken in. For weeks, he played the role of a grieving husband, all the while knowing the truth it was unbearable, but he thought it was the only way to protect himself and their daughter. Following his confessions, Babi was arrested on the 17th of June 2021. Lydia's custody fell into Caroline's parents. Babi was tried, and Athens court found him guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for killing Caroline and an additional 11 years for killing their dog and Ting, for trying to corrupt the course of investigations by giving false reports and false testimonies. In addition to prison sentence, he had to pay a fine of €21,000.